welcome all neuroplasticians. I'm excited to have Dr. Evian Gordon on the call. Evian, welcome to the npnHub, my friend. It's really good to have you here. Everybody wave hello to Dr. Evian Gordon. Evian, it's great to have you here. Those of you who don't know Dr. Gordon, he is a world-renowned neuroscientist. He's built the largest database with over 8 billion data points of neurological data. He's the leading thinker in applied integrative neuroscience. He's a leading thought champion of the work of the neuroplasticians. So, Evian, there's so much great work that you're doing, and we're so excited to have you on the call today. We're going to try to save questions for the end, Evian, but if you have any questions you want to ask people during the keynote, please feel free to do so. But thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Gordon, and over to you, and feel free to begin the keynote whenever you're ready.
Hey, well, firstly, JJ, thank you. It's marvelous to be here, and it's an honor to be asked to give a keynote at this great anniversary of the first full year of what a marvelous international community of neuroplasticians, neuroplasticity. And I chose such a big picture topic to try and fit the sense of occasion. So neuroplasticity and our sense of self. And I suppose it's so timely in so many ways to think about the remarkable power of neuroplasticity. As Charles Darwin said, it's not the strongest or the most intelligent who survive, but those who can manage change. And given that neuroplasticity is just the ability to reorganize, the brain reorganizing and forming new neural networks throughout life, what a central component of applied integrated neuroscience, of the whole of neuroscience it is. And why it really is a privilege to be addressing this community on such a remarkable sort of day, week of this anniversary, that you've amazingly put this whole community together. The first year is so hard of building a community of this kind, and it's just a marvelous kind of time to be participating in this expansion that's going to follow. And the reason that I think the expansion is inevitable and the power of what we're all sitting on is so impactful is because the centrality of neuroplasticity is truly across our life framework, from our genetic predisposition, then the attachment, whether it's secure or anxious or avoidant, to our conditioning, that neuroplasticity in this brain cosmos of 85 billion neurons and 100 trillion connections is just continuous every second as we move through our early lives and face the inevitable early life kind of stresses and traumas in some cases, and then as we then begin to explore, as we get older, the dynamics of that cosmos, of our learnings, how well we take our learnings forward, and the traumas and the lessons we've learned and the good insights we've had, all the way towards our death. And so that I'm going to revise very briefly the framework that we discussed on a roundtable previously about having a framework for all of the neuroplasticians. So we have some common form of self-reference. I'm going to then discuss a little bit about the different doorways that all the neuroplasticians so far come from, and that the future ones no doubt will fit into one or more of these doorways. I'm going to highlight the criticality of personalizing what we're doing. And then I'm going to give one example today of the continuum, the spectrum of ways in which the neuroplasticity insights can be enhanced and used in a very strategically powerful way. And I'm going to use a marvelous example from a a dear friend and colleague of mine, Philip Ramiro, who's going to be talking about a psychedelic example and Buddhism, but also highlight at the end that it doesn't matter what the inducement of neuroplasticity is, or the example from talk therapy to psychedelics. What matters is the clarity of purpose that we use our privileged situation, education, timeliness of being neuroplasticians at this time in this world, and therefore I end off inevitably with AI, because that has dramatically changed the world and our world. And I will end off where we started the previous roundtable. And when JJ reached out to me to say, can we explore the framework that I've used for the brain as a system to explore that kind of expansion or a sort of subset of it for neuroplasticity, what does that mean as for us all as a community to put together and learn from each other in an integrative database? So that is the narrative that I'm sharing with you in the next couple of minutes. So let's begin where it all starts. The neuroplasticity cosmos is happening every second, even as we speak now. Every one of those neurons is rewiring to some degree every time it fires. So from literally our attachment going around the circle to the conditioning, our traumas, our learning, our experience, and our tasks and goals throughout our lives. The neural networks that fire together will wire together. So we are not a concept. We are not just one mechanism in the brain. We are talking about the central mechanism that continually reshapes our sense of self. And as we all know now, of course, this is not a complex set of dynamics in terms of the way mechanisms in the brain work. They're usually much less known and much more contentious. These are getting pretty well elucidated, of the synaptic neural connections throughout life, the strengthening of the long-term potentiation or weakening, long-term depression of the new synapses, the synaptic strengths and efficiencies, the way they change, the neurogenesis, the new dendritic branching, the additional myelination that can occur, and the simple rules. I mean, how much simpler does it get? The neurons that fire together, wire together. So if we just have a framework and we focus on what works and magnify that, we're talking about a very, very powerful mechanism where, with discipline and determination and presence and planning, we literally can rewire any life situation to some extent. And we know that applies not only in the brain, but we know that particularly in the stress and relaxation response, it applies in the body. And we know how powerfully that system and those interconnections are, not just at a microcellular level, but at a macro mechanism level within the brain and within the body. And critically and increasingly, we can see the criticality of that alignment between our brain and body function as we apply those insights to this continuum of possibilities that are represented in this community. So yes, we've discussed before, and I'll just end off briefly for the next minute or two, the kind of basis of the framework was drawing upon this standardized database that I had the privilege to set up initially at Westmead Hospital, but with super help from Stephen Koslow, the ex-head of the Human Brain Project in Washington, and hundreds of scientists around the world to standardize pretty much everything we can measure in the brain, from genetics to cognition to psychology to neuroimaging. Huge amount of questionnaires, personality, early life experience, happiness, all the way through to genetics, and to bring those pieces together and now to also use AI to potentially explore. But it's more the principle of standardization removes a lot of the noise. It increases a lot of the signal and we're looking to see what matters. And our last two big picture kind of context before we move into a little bit about the framework again, and then look at that marvelous single example that Philip brings, and then end off with the examples we all have and that are constantly, being emerged in the community on your marvelous roundtables. And how do we harness that more effectively to share and elucidate and expand the learning? So if we take the Maslow's hierarchy in terms of thinking about our big picture of our sense of self, now this very simple, over lifetime, modulating physiological needs, safety, love, belonging, esteem, and self-actualization. And we sort of countervail that with the hierarchy of brain dynamics that are the basis, the engine of neuroplasticity is happening from our safety first in the brain to the sensory input mode output networks that shape every second of our lives, to emotion, intuition, feeling, and rational thinking, and then our personality preferences and behavior all the way up to actualization. And it all is pivoted around two fundamental processes: non-conscious, some people think about it unconscious. I deliberately called it non-conscious because we are aware of it. We are aware that things happen to us because our non-conscious brain is determining what keeps us safe rapidly in a fifth of a second. And we were one of the first laboratories all over the world that measured that reality. And then our rational brain, and that interplay is so central to the dynamics of the clarity with which we see and rewire our sense of self. So just to recap what we said before about bringing that together into a simple evidence-based framework and the timing of it, let me just replay a few-minute video for you and then move on to a specific applied example of sense of self, and then end off with some comments on AI and the database. So a summary of the video, a summary of the framework again.
Okay, that's enough of the blueprint basics. Let's return to the main brain game: shortcuts, short-term, and rationality that navigate our approximately 50,000 daily thoughts. The four key processes that govern your thoughts, your decisions, and behaviors are emotions, intuition, feelings, and rationality. Emotion and intuition occur automatically, non-consciously, in other words, unconsciously. But you are consciously aware of your feelings and your rational thinking. So let's have a look at each of these four key processes. Emotions are a shortcut alarm system in your brainstem that helps you interpret environment and body language cues of what is threatening or rewarding. They are a key part of your automatic shortcuts for safety and short-term gratification. Intuition is a rapid best guess processing network of your most likely effective decision at any point in time, and it is best not to underestimate your intuition, especially when it is based on previously similar experiences. Feelings are your body activations, such as sweating or a gut reaction, triggered by your emotions, intuitions, and limbic system. Rational is your conscious, deliberate check of the details using your frontal cortex of what is your best decision option. And if any decision you make is not optimal, it will self-correct you. How these four key processes interact and create your unique personality and behavior is also influenced by your genetic predispositions and early conditioning. That's the what basic brain framework. But it is the timing and interconnections within and between these neural networks that make the magic happen. That determines who you are, how effective you will be, how resiliently you'll cope, and the extent to which you will thrive. Emotion and intuition occur non-consciously within a fifth of a second. You are consciously aware of your feelings and your rational thinking from about half a second onwards as you implement your decisions and personality and your preferential behaviors. In other words, by the time you say, I feel upset, feel frustrated, or I feel excited, your non-conscious emotions have already happened to you and have been sorted through your vast array of past experiences or information filed in your brain.
Okay, so now we have a framework, and we can also expand that framework to our fight, flight, and calm flexible system, the other dynamics. So we've got non-conscious and conscious dynamics going on in the brain. We also have another very, in essence, simple dynamic between fight, flight, where we can be quite negative as develop not only negativity bias, but a kind of victim narrative, self-pity, resentment, fear of losing, self-numbing, self-sabotage, and a calm, flexible state that we're more likely to have a better sense of self and acceptance and gratitude and self-regulation and embrace the bigger issues of life, like the impermanence of life. So we have these simple kind of processes that have incredible complexity and nuance that all form part of a continuum. There is no them and us in the brain, only us. And the spectrum of therapies are addressing, or of well-being and peak performance, are addressing the extent to which we either harmonize these non-conscious and conscious processes and body dynamics of fight, flight versus calm and flexible, or the extent to which they fracture. And that balance is where the neuroplasticity insights become critical to help people, not just in general terms, the sea of should lists, the extraordinary industrial complexes where celebrities and unqualified people or ideas are being magnified with little evidence and no background in the complexities and nuances we're talking about, can be and will be increasingly replaced by evidence-based, outcome-measured ways to rewire this marvelous spectrum from mental health to well-being to peak performance, so that there is no them and us in this continuum, only us. And we all have this ongoing dynamical existence. We just fluctuate in the extent and our ability to cope across this continuum. And that is why the neuroplasticity insights are so critical to bring and demystify and deconstruct and destigmatize the labels and the simplifications that are just simply not able to address the kind of nuances that is the reality, but nor is it that complicated. That takes a little bit of insight and a little bit of a framework. So I'm going to end off with one example. Now, this is just an example, but it's one of the best examples I've seen of how to take that framework, the brain is a dynamical system, but how to distill in a masterful manner, in my opinion, that Philip Romero does here. And this is from my video series and at dreviangordon.com, where I try and put out a video once a month on these kinds of examples of applying this framework to mental health, well-being, or peak performance, and now increasingly with an AI context. There's an AI series. But what Philip did when I did this with him is share his 4-decade journey of thinking about sense of self. He's a psychiatrist, pediatric psychiatrist in New York. He's a neuroscientist, marvelous neuroscientist, and he, as we'll hear in a moment, he chose to use ketamine for people who have depression to generate rapid, large-scale neuroplasticity. But the key and a lesson for all of us and every therapist on the planet, in my view, of what Philip did is he immediately followed with a very clear model of behavior change while the neuroplasticity was still evident. And he explained the model of neuroplasticity in a very straightforward way to people. So it's a nice complement when the questions in the round table, well, how do we expand this broad framework to expand specific examples? So here's a specific example of the default mode network, the me, and the anterior precuneus network, the I, and how that forms our combined sense, part of our combined sense of self. I mean, obviously, the bigger framework elucidates the interconnected networks in a more nuanced way, and then he provides people with training in Buddhism, and that's the mechanism he has chosen. So let's hear it from him rather than from me, but a good example
of applied
neuroplasticity.
In each of us is a developmental process. Children have a very limited sense of self and limited ability to think. They can't really do abstract thinking until puberty. Girls are better at it than boys. And it takes the brain 25 years to develop. So it's a slow process of developing a sense of self. And I see a lot of young adults, and they have great college degrees, but they don't know who they are or what makes them happy. And they don't want to be a lawyer or a doctor or a banker. And they're very confused. And how much time do they spend creating a sense of self? Zero. They don't know how. They've never learned. So I have built this system, creative intelligence training, from this Evo-Devo model, evolution of human culture, and the development of the individual sense of self. So to make it very pertinent to today's neuroscience, there are two aspects of the brain that inform the sense of self. The default mode network, which we'll talk about when we get to ketamine, is called the resting sense of self. It's a complex network that ultimately informs the narrative of me. We should call it the ego. And it's narcissism. It's all about mine and me and want and get, and don't share, and my turn, and all of this me. Look at me, I'm happy, I'm a success, I'm on vacation. It's not you at work, it's you relaxing. Meditation, which is quite old, 2,500 years ago, emerged, and it challenges the ego. It says, be still, do nothing, breathe. Watch your breathing. Watch your body. Be a body, not a me. And so over time and years of disciplined practice, meditation dials down the ego. It's like a rheostat on the me. And when you really are an accomplished meditator and you sit, maybe on a weekend retreat or something, you're gone, you're not talking to anybody. You eat, you sleep, you go to the dojo and you spend 8-12 hours meditating, and you're not there. And it is the most refreshing rebirth because the sense of self that emerges from a meditation retreat truly is new. And a lot of garbage has been dumped in those not me states for prolonged periods of time. Now, very recently, a new part of the brain has been identified, which is linked to the default mode network, and it's the anterior precuneus, which is sits right towards the back of the brain, and it is believed that this is the body self. Very interesting what happens when they stimulate the right and the left. When they stimulate one side, it feels like, I'm falling, I'm falling, I'm falling. And when they stimulate the other side, that, oh, I'm floating, I'm floating. But it's the body. It's not me. It's the scientists call it, this is the I, the embodiment sense of existence. Whereas the me is my ego, my attachments, etc. So these two communicate with each other developmentally over time to create the sense of self, which is dynamic and ever-changing, can be guided in its creative making, which is what I train people to do. And then if we look at, well, gee, I don't want to spend 25 years in the dojo, liberating myself from my greedy ego in this, materialistic world. Psychedelics, what do? Unplug the default mode network, but they don't unplug the precuneus, anterior precuneus. So the sense of I, pure consciousness, is all that's left as you go into the ketamine experience. Just about an hour. At about 20 minutes, as the hallucinations begin and you begin to have this distorted sort of sense of what's going on? Where am I? Am I alive? And finally you feel like, am I dead? And the I is no longer embodied and it's just perceiving, and then boom, the big hallucinations come and the childhood memories, and you get this flood of unconscious memories and hallucinatory projections, and it's a drift, it's a journey, and so you're not yourself for quite a period of time, and then as the infusion reduces, you gradually return. And when I'm with patients observing them, one of the first things they do is start, oh, my fingers, oh, my mouth. They start to come back like a baby, to their embodiment. And eventually the sense of self emerges. And those who are able to get to that full release, they all say the same thing. Wow.
So wow, indeed. And I'm asking you all and I want to share with you all, this is an example of applying a whole brain framework to a specific case. In Philip's case, immediately gives them the training of Buddhism, Four Noble Truths, and the 8 Paths. But it could be applied to any of the examples that we have seen so far, whether it's Sue's resilience training, Judy's training to biases and decision-making, any of the examples. I'm hopeful that today, on this anniversary, will inspire you to distill your learning of what worked to induce neuroplasticity and what were the takeaways in applying the framework, the model. And it doesn't matter which doorway you are coming through, whether you're coming through my doorway would be more the brain science doorway, a very short-term brain training of very specific aspects of either enhancing the non-conscious, making the non-conscious conscious, or conscious self-regulation issues. For spiritual people, the doorway could be Buddhism or any of the other 4,000 religious specialty, wonderful wisdoms that they would like to teach. And more there's this massive explosion. I live next to Silicon Valley, it's like in San Francisco, these massive ketamine inducers. But ketamine is obviously one, ketamine, psilocybin, NMDA, LSD. And lastly, but by no means least, in this community, there is already the spectrum of possibilities of those interventions. And to personalize them. So finding what works and magnifying, using the neuroplasticity to magnify the rewiring rather than overwhelm them with should lists and just the theoretical concepts. That is the small part. It's for going from knowing to doing with a very specific plan which was the basis of our previous roundtable, and it's the basis of the video series that I do and of the book, The Brain from Knowing to Doing. The key is going from knowing to doing in a very disciplined way, and hopefully we can all share those from talk therapy, brain training, brain body with its brain meditations, brain music, as I mentioned to you, brain music labs. It's a marvelous way to induce people's brain states. Medications, of course, and as I mentioned to you, we are hopefully through Sondemand and the big database taking the first test to the FDA to predict treatment remission in depression. Neurostimulation, biofeedback, neurofeedback, all of these are marvelous fields, each with their own discipline, their own wisdoms, and their own plans that can be very effective when they've been enhanced with neuroplasticity inducement. And I want to end off with AI because as I said today, and I'm privileged to be part of an AI community called Next Collabs, which came out of Singularity. And for those interested, there are some videos on my site, drviangordon.com, from the key thought leaders in the space. But there is something new happening even this week. Some of you would have seen there's a new article from people who've just resigned from OpenAI, who are emphasizing the dramatic projections within AI of the speed and scale. That's a painting of mine of the brain and AI on the left, and so you can maybe see that each paintbrush is a neural network, a neuroplasticity network, and now we can see the extent to which our insights of the brain and AI can converge. And at the moment, the high-fiving, the projections, the excitement are about this dramatic increase in AI globally, and the speed that in this article that just came out this last week, it's a big buzz, and it's if you want to look it up, it's just called the awareness, it's a situational awareness, and these ex-AI people are now showing the data and just the speed at which the intelligence, I suppose, of these machines are emerging and the complexity of decision-making that they're capable of. Then there are people like myself and Byron Reese and others who are much more skeptical about one thing in this convergence, which is the human brain. People underestimate the power, the evolution, the pattern generation, the adaptation, the search for meaning and purpose within human brains. And our community, I believe, are particularly well placed to share examples, as Philip has done, with specific retraining in a specific purpose-driven way. And I believe that the biggest kind of interface, putting aside the dramatic challenges of information distortion that AI is bringing, on the positive side, the empowerment of people, that every day they can look up any topic that we've discussed in this last half an hour, in an hour on GPT-4, get the validation data from Questy.ai. We are being empowered in our sense of self in a way that was unimaginable even 5 years ago. And to help all in our community and people that we touch to magnify what works, find the data, use a framework. If you don't like this one, find one that works for you. And move on to share those insights as a community. In many ways, less is more, being clear about what is your example, being articulate and written and data and pictures to show what the plan was that you helped people use these neuroplasticity insights and personalize. And then in my last slide and my last point, hopefully draw upon the privileged experience that I and my community had to bring together a database on the brain. We can expand that idea, standardize, share detailed what works, why, how, where else can it be applied. And with that, I will thank you all for the privilege of sharing this wonderful anniversary with you all, and end off with just congratulating you on creating a community that matters and that is purpose-based and that will have meaning for everyone. The more we share and combine and bring in a bigger spectrum of frontline brain warriors, neuroplastician warriors. Thank you all very much, and I'm happy to answer any questions in the few minutes that we have remaining.
Thank you so much, Evian. That was an incredible deep dive, and you did it so well. Thanks for keeping to the timing. It gives us 15 minutes for some questions. The first question I want to do is speak about the framework, and as a neuroplastician discipline emerges, having a reliable framework makes the likelihood of the discipline standing up on its own 2 feet or its own 2 lobes, if I be so silly. And the idea, I've written actually a couple of blogs on the role of intuition, and I don't think people get it enough. People understand emotion, they understand feelings, they understand rationality, but I don't understand intuition. Please explore that for a moment, David and Evan, so we can get a better understanding of how this framework holds all these quadrants together, please, if that's possible, quickly.
Chuck, again, there's no monopoly of wisdom in any of this. It's all just as much evidence-based as we could get from the scientific literature and from our publications and the data. But the power of intuition is very simple. So all of these issues have layers of complexity where you get to the point where, of course, depending on people's personality type, you'll always find people who are going to pull the wings off the butterfly, and that's the game of science. They should. But the essence of intuition that's proven so powerful across the evidence, the spectrum of evidence, is that the brain is constantly making forward projections. Why? It's doing that because, again, first principles, if the brain is all about safety, and I think that is pretty universally across an amazing number of disciplines agreed upon. If the brain is primarily about safety, we wouldn't be having this conversation if it wasn't. We wouldn't be here if it wasn't. If it's about safety, it needs to project what is the best outcome to be that it should use to keep it safe, to keep it alive. And then once it feels safe, it can start using the projections of how do we go for rewards. So in answer essentially to that question about intuition, I certainly have found, and many of the people in my community have found, that the first issue is to see just how incredibly feed-forward projecting the brain is. And we can measure it, and there's lots, for those people who go to GPT-4 and test it. What is contingent negative variation? How does the brain project what's coming up in the next second? How does it find those alternatives? Now, obviously, it's digging, it's rapidly scanning. It's millions of previous experiences and exploring what were the outcomes, what was the good outcomes, what was the bad. And that's how we know and learn and avoid from our mistakes and magnify where we were successful. Intuition is nothing more than that. It's just the brain is doing that at such a fractional second level to keep us safe all the time. But we're also projecting social, work, interpersonal relationship issues all the time. What can I say that is maybe not going to make me so reactive this time, or induce reactivity in somebody else because I was thoughtless? We use and draw upon our experience, our memory, all the time, to that when we do project, what is the most likely scenario? And when I say we're not doing that rationally, that's the key tricky part of it. We know it happens intuitively. It's happening so fast that you do not have an ability to shape that in real time. But you can have an ability to learn from the mismatch, from the mistake, and then put that into memory. So next time it happens, you maybe will automatically project the scenario that better reflects the learnings that were good for you. And the only other point I'll say, JJ, is this. Many people say, yeah, but what about when you haven't had a previous experience? And that's tougher. And in fact, people who study intuition say be very careful of trusting your intuitions when you've never had an experience like this before. But then there are people who just believe in a different level of energy and of connectedness of the universe, who say the universe is looking after me. And that's great. If that works for you, that's fine. But there's cause for just being a little more cautious, to rely on your intuition when it's never had a previous example of it. But even, I'll end off by saying this, even if it hasn't, there's something similar or it will go to, what's the closest thing to this I've ever had? So we are always being driven by the projection of our brain to keep us safe. And that, to my understanding, is all that intuition is.
This is such a captivating conversation, Evan. I'm really grateful that there's so much depth. One of the questions was you spoke about 8 or 6 quadrants of talk therapy, training, meditation, biofeedback, psychedelics. What do you think of talk therapy? What do you think about humor as an instrument to improve neuroplasticity? Have you considered that? Karen's putting a thumbs up because she's our in-house neurohumorist, and that is a very important question for her. But how does humor influence neuroplasticity? Is it doing something differently? I mean, what is your...
Well, that is such a great question. And Karen is more than just should be putting a thumbs up. She should be like one of the poster people of neuroplasticity, because her and Heidi Henner and others, but Karen was the most powerful proponent and researcher of the power of humor. Now, why is humor such a critical part of the brain training component? Because whilst the brain is tremendously attuned, more than anything, to safety, and therefore incredibly looking for threat cues, it's also equally attuned to positivity, to what is my reward. And humor is the most marvelous circuit breaker of negativity. And what Karen has done, and with Heidi, and also they've really weaved in curiosity, asking us, they've just opened the bandwidth of the way people can relate to themselves and embrace this endorphin, serotonin, magical alternative to just magnifying negativity, but looking at the humor in life, embracing the joy, is such a critical neuroplasticity inducer of the best kind. Because as we said in the beginning, it's flexibility of brain processing in that green zone, the vagus state. That is where you are more likely to be able to be receptive to behavior change. And that is why humor is one of the best examples, and the cleanest example, and the purest example. No drugs needed, no anything needed other than your own sense of openness to look for and find humor in kind of every situation. And I've learned, Karen and Heidi have been my teachers in the power, and they have a marvelous community, a very powerful community, humor community, that I would urge you all to look into and join.
Humor is no laughing matter.
Humor is no laughing matter.
It is such an important tool. And on the other side of the neuroplasticity fence around stress and building resilience. So we got building resilience, 3 neuroplasticities. So we're kind of building better networks, but building resilience to stress. It sounds like contradictory.
Yeah.
And building new networks to overcome old networks that are stressing out, and building resilience. Someone asked a question around that, Evan. I think I got the question wrong, but how do people with high stress levels use neuroplasticity tools to build resilience?
Yeah, well, look, that is a very tough question. And that, again, one of my teachers in this has been Sue and her marvelous book. And the point about resilience is this is tough, because the ability to overcome adversity is the highest challenge we face in our sense of self journey, because we are all going to be faced with adversity. And often that adversity is unexpected. And often it can lead to a cycle of decline when we don't have a framework and we don't have the right people guiding us in this targeted, planned, specific way. And they provide well-intentioned, but information that can actually sometimes make things worse. So resilience and the bounce back ability, all the way through to the peak performance ability, with, of course, Angela Duckworth, called grit, it's critical. And where the neuroplasticity insights are critical, in my opinion, is that it heightens our appreciation for openness, for flexibility, for enhancing our neuroplastic attitude and specific strategies ready for what works for us. That's where the personalization comes in, JJ. It's not a matter of just willy-nilly, if there's an old joke, if you're a neurofeedback practitioner and somebody comes to you, you're going to give them neurofeedback. The really smartest therapists and the ones who are most open, they really do spend a lot of time personalizing what is the best fit for that person. Is it drugs? Is it talk therapy? Is it by a technology inducement? Is it is it ketamine? And I think that's the key for building the resilience, that it's the more you personalize it, and last but not least, training. It's building the reservoir of sort of thinking about situations and how am I going to deal with them, rather than waiting for disasters to happen and being unprepared. So much of brain training, which is what I think the entire field of neuroplasticity, the subtext should be called, is, it's training neuroplasticity, not just understanding it. How do we do it? And then if we do it, why is it any different to the rest of medicine or health? Prevention. How much preventative resilience do people do? How much do we build up our reservoir? And now as I reach my old age and I look back at how poorly I've prepared, even as somebody who did this for a living and for 40 years had the privilege of running this brain institute and the database, it's because our brain, as we mentioned in the framework, is about short-term and shortcuts, immediate gratification. And even though we've trebled in brain size in the last 3 million years, hominids, from Australopithecus to Homo erectus to Homo habilis to humans, even though we have this massive association cortex now, it's barely got the ability for long-term thinking. We are not, that's why you just look out the window at the world. We are not naturally evolved yet for the brain to be integrally prioritizing long-term thinking, long-term consequences, and prevention. And so I think resilience and long-term thinking and exploring the consequences, the unintended consequences of our long-term lifestyle behaviors, decision-making, extent of alignment of what we do in our lives, every part of our life, making decisions that are aligned, that fit with this simple brain framework, they all determine our resilience at the end, the extent of self-regulation when it matters most, and the extent of picking ourselves up off the floor, off the canvas if we've really been knocked down badly, when opportunists come and strip mine you, when people who you trust absolutely are shocking in terms of the level of kind of, that old saying, your friends sometimes are more dangerous than your enemies. These are the life's unexpected realities. And so to have and preempt and build up a resilience, I think, is one of the most critical contexts and preventative skills that are required, and that neuroplasticity is like a hand in a glove to that process.
And there's such a beautiful explanation. As you know, Evan, we live in tumultuous times. Disruption is the norm, and organizations are going through disruption, and as a result, employees and just the general function is that we just got multiple threats, from all different angles. And, building resilience to one threat at a time, is it's more doable because you've got one target. But if you've got multiple targets, what do you do with all this flood of different things? Do you just need to break it down and make a tick list? Or, is there a specific neuroplasticity tool? Do you need to meditate more or take mushrooms or,
So that's such a great question. The questions are so excellent. So again, no monopoly of wisdom on anything, but my observation is that question, like neuroplasticity, like curiosity, these are deep principle questions. So in the learning of what behavior change, I mean, for those of you who remember the round table of what I presented, if you can teach, you've got 50,000 thoughts a day, approximately. If you can teach people, or if you can be the guide, I don't believe we teach anyone anything. We can be the guide on the side to change one of those thoughts from negative to positive, and you get the principles right. How to be more present, that it's happening in the moment, that it's an inside job, that you should have a plan of how you select what you will do rather than what you should do from the should lists. When you have a plan and one example of changing one thought, you can change your life for real, because you now have the formula. I used to use the analogy, it's like giving people a fishing rod to teach them how to fish, but I'm a vegan now, so I'm trying to find a better example. So a better example for a vegan, can't think of one yet. If anyone's got one, email it to me. But that's the right analogy, that if you can change one thing, you change your entire sense of you instead of placing self-limiting beliefs on yourself, you now go, hold on, I do have self-efficacy. I have self-insight, and I've got a strategy and a framework that matters. As I said before in the roundtable, what's the difference between an expert and a novice? Novices know a lot of stuff. They got facts all the time. They got leaves coming up everywhere, this fact, that fact. But when you look at experts, the difference is they have a framework and they know how the basics work in that framework. And they are the people who make the difference. And it's the same analogy, in my view, JJ, to the point. If we can change one example in this dramatic, and now with AI, change is constant. But if we can change one thing in that firestorm of change that we all are living through, we should be able to have the confidence. We will have the confidence to be able to change anything, because the principles have now been rewired in our brain, and our attitude and our mindset. I would even call it, JJ, and my final point on this, and it might be a prescient way to end on this, is I believe we can help people induce a neuroplasticity mindset, so that the mindset is we can't solve every problem, but we can share the basics, the frameworks that work, and the programs, the approach, whether it's the Gordon 3-step habit, there's a summary of science, or better ones, Karen's curiosity program, Karen's humor program, Heidi's curiosity program. It doesn't matter. We can bring those together, find the fit, teach people to use it in one adversity that they overcome. I believe we change the mindset, and with the mindset change and sharing those, I believe if we all did that for the next year, on the 2nd anniversary, when I'm listening to one of you present, what have we learned in this last year when the AI tsunami changed the world? What did we achieve? I think the more of those examples we share and use and teach and guide, I'm not even going to use the word teach anymore, guide, the more I think we will be a really powerful community with purpose and meaning that'll extend way beyond our individual efforts.
Wow, there's so much stuff going on in the chat. Everyone is bombing me. There's 2 questions, and maybe there's only time to answer one. But the first one is mindset versus heart set. You've done some work in HRV, and how does the brain show up in the body? So HRV, I've got a big interest in that myself, as you know. So that's one one neighborhood of discussion. And the other one is AI and its ability to be intuitive, for it to be emotional, for AI to be able to be functional in the same way that the brain is. Looking at neural networks and looking at how large language models are built on these networks that are copying the brain, can AI be emotional? So HRV or emotional AI, where do you want to go?
So yeah, I've only got a minute left, and so let me put it like this. It's a great question to end off on. Mindset is critical, and I'd urge those of you who are dealing with executives to read Gary Bowles' framework book, which is Mindsets, Skill Sets, and Tool Sets, and look at Gary Bowles' 1-hour course on mindsets that I did with him and with Crystal Fernanda. Mindsets is crucial. And with AI, there's the new tool sets. They are going to be good at predicting things. They are based on predictive. People say, oh, it's just predicting the next word. Oh, no, it's predicting the next pattern. But use the AI. For those of you who are not following Ethan Mollock, Mollock, I advise you to just go to his LinkedIn thread and read his book called Co-Intelligence. He's one of the high fivers in Silicon Valley. He's brilliant. And he's easily the thought leader in AI at the moment in the United States business. But the point is, yes, AI can make these marvelous predictions, but the limitation is the human brain and the neuroplasticity spectrum of issues we're talking about is the missing link. And what Ethan says in his book on co-intelligence, treat the AI like a human, but tell it what kind of human you want it to be. The fears of, the over-exaggerated fears, in my view, and the limited appreciation of the power of the brain, I think, were coming together. And so I think AI will be a tremendous aid in predictions, in helping, in quantitatively looking at predictions that matter, but they got their limitations in that regard. And I think the combination with the brain and its inherent power and of adaptability, as we started off with the Darwin quote, ability to change, ability for context, meaning, and purpose, and the power of the brain to use AI, to be empowered by AI, will increase the mindsets that people bring very synergistically. And so this is a time to really set those choices into play in your own lives with the right experts like Ethan Mollock and next collabs. And I think it's going to be a very interesting year. So thank you very much, everybody, and thank you for such marvelous questions. And thank you again for the privilege of being here today.
Evian, thank you so much. Your intelligence is humbling, but your elegance and open-heartedness make it so beautiful to be in your presence. The generosity of you making your framework available so that the neuroplasticity functions in the brain, so that the neuroplastician as a discipline that is founded in neuroscience is incomparable of excitement and benefit. So, thank you, my friend. You are amazing, and we are so grateful for your time. And once again, a round of applause for Evian. Thank you so much.
Thank you all. Have a wonderful week.
Yay, thanks, Evian. Woo!
See you all. Thank you all. Bye.
Thank you.
You rock, Evian. Yeah, you rock and roll.